All right, we are glad you're here tonight. We welcome you to our Bible class. We're in Hebrews chapter 12 tonight. Hope you're having a great week so far. Pretty good weather for central Pennsylvania in January. Going into February, right? Give it a day, it'll change. Yeah, that's the truth of it. Hopefully you grabbed an outline. There was new outlines on the communion table for Hebrews chapter 12. Following our prayer, we'll get into that study together. So hopefully you have your Bibles. If you would, turn to Hebrews 12, and then you can grab your outline there. We'll have a little bit of introduction on chapter 12, and then we'll get right into to our outline. All right, so let's see. I'm going to ask Stephen tonight, if he will, to lead us in a prayer, please. Let's all bow.
Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for giving us a time tonight where we can come together and study your word and learn more about you and help us to all benefit from the study tonight and to share it in our everyday lives.
Amen. All right. So we are talking about the endurance of faith in chapter 12. Chapter 11, he had the examples of faith, and many, many great examples that we dealt with last week. Now he's going to deal with the endurance of faith, chapter 12. And so sometimes folks will want to take Hebrews 11 and they'll want to divorce it from everything in between, because it looks like at the onset it might be like totally something different. It's like a different subject. It's not at all. In fact, the previous chapter, chapter 11, on the heroes and the heroines, if you will, of faith, is not, as one writer said, a detached masterpiece that lacks continuity, but rather it is a brilliant divine exhortation to continue in the faith that is placed right in the middle of two great sections of appeal. And the appeal, section 1, was chapter 10, 19 through 39. Remember where he exhorted them, let us, let us, let us. And then chapter 12 is going to be another one of those great sections of appeal. In the middle of that, he said, here's kind of what it looks like. Here's kind of like what you should be doing, all right? So there's word pictures, and there's really great stuff in Hebrews chapter 11 that brings those illustrations to our mind, and we could see some of those people of faith that really help us to continue. Hebrews chapter 12 begins with a challenge that is based on the previous discourse of faith. So he finishes this discourse. He said, God's provided some better thing for us, that they without us should not be perfect. And so he's just concluded the fact that all these people died seeking this better country. They looked for looked for a greater day, looked for a better place, and they didn't really get to see the reward, he said. But when he begins chapter 12, he shows that Christians are, to continue. We're to continue. We're to endure. And that's kind of the key word in this text. I read somewhere, I didn't see the bumper sticker, but I read, and I think Mariah will absolutely love this. Mariah, you may even have this bumper sticker at your repertoire. I don't know. The bumper sticker was supposedly outside of a hospital, and it read this: nurses are patient people. Give that a minute for it to sink in. Nurses are patient people. Well, I don't know. I think with Mariah that's true. I don't know if all nurses are patient people or not, but they should be, right? Obviously they deal with patience, but what he's dealing with in chapter 12 is Christians are patient people. Not patience in the sense that nurses would deal, but our patience, our endurance, our continuing in the faith is what really separates us from really the world. We don't quit. How can a person be patient and endure when it seems like life is falling apart? It's easy to be patient. It's easy to endure when things are going good. But when life falls apart, and I'm going to encourage you to come on Sunday morning to Bible study, get all charged up, and then as we worship, we're going to talk about facing life's challenges. Sermon number 1, facing adversity. Man, how do I face these things when my life is falling apart? That was kind of what was going on in Hebrews. These readers had become Christians, New Testament Christians. Many of them had left Judaism, And so kind of the natural thing was, hey, I'm obeying God. I'm following God's footsteps. I'm trying to emulate Jesus. And all these things are happening to me. And you can almost hear them in the background saying, why is God letting this happen? Wouldn't it be easier if I just turned and went back? I mean, I think I would have a lot less problems if I did that. Well, he begins this section with point number 1 in the first 4 verses. And he says, how do we endure? How do we be patient? Number 1, we must have a consideration. There must be a consideration. First 4 verses, wherefore. So he's tying the last section to this section. Wherefore, seeing we also are compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which doth so easily beset us. And let us run with patience the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who, for the joy that was set before him, endured the cross, despising the shame, and is set down at the right hand of the throne of God. For consider him that endured such contradiction of sinners against himself, lest ye be wearied and faint in your minds. Ye have not yet resisted unto blood, striving against sin. So, under this idea of consideration, I want you to notice, number 1, the event that he brings up. Verse 1, wherefore we're compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses. So he takes us right into almost like an Olympic game or a contest, if you will. And it is almost like you're running down this runway of faith. It's a race. He says it's a race, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And it's like on the sides of this place where you're at, this big auditorium, there are witnesses, and they are lining the auditorium. And what are they? There's Moses, and there's Rahab, and there's Joshua, and there's Abraham. There's all these heroes and heroines of faith. And what they're doing essentially is by their lifestyle, they're saying, you can do this. All right, we are witnesses. We are proof that you can run this race of faith and be successful. Look at us. And that's what he just did in Hebrews 11. Look at us. Now, the event is kind of interesting because he first brings up a race. Paul's writings, now I'm not suggesting, I don't want you to get the idea that Paul wrote Hebrews, because he may not have. But again, this is one of those things where I believe he did, and this is one of those areas where I think it kind of jives, okay? Paul was a great one to use the illustration of races and boxing and all those type of things. And here, the writer does the same thing. In fact, Paul was really good at this. 1 Corinthians 9, 24 to 27. 1 Timothy 6 and verse 12. Give you a couple other passages. 2 Timothy 4 and verse 7. You know, I have run the race. I have kept the faith. I did it, Paul said. I've done it, okay? And so, he uses this illustration over and over again. And whether it's Paul or not, the Holy Spirit uses the illustration again here. The word race is such a neat word. It comes from a word in the original language from which we get our word, and I want you to notice this, from which we get our word agony. So when we think of a race, like when you think of the word race, you don't really think of total agony. I mean, you might. It depends on if you like to run or not. But that's not the word that come to my mind. I'm thinking of a guy that's in shape or a lady that's in shape, and they're running. You know, they're running this race, and they're just really doing a great job. That's not really the concept he uses here. It's the idea of agony. And so he brings up this idea of agony, and I want you to think about the race that he's talking about. Christianity is not an inactive luxury. Sometimes we have the misconception that because I've become a Christian, now it's going to get easy. Now life's going to be easy. That's not true. That's not true at all. Life, and I want us to see this, and I'll bring this point, I'm sure, up Sunday, because this is all in my heart as I'm studying for both of these that go hand in hand. Life, at best, is very difficult. And I wish it weren't this way, but it's not meant to be easy. Life's not meant to be easy. Now, I'm not going to give you all those details just yet, because I want to save some for Sunday, because I'm just like fascinated with with what I'm discovering in God's Word. But it's not supposed to be easy. He said, this race that is set before us, it's agonizing. It's grueling. And I don't even like to say that. I don't even like to use that because I want to be a positive person. I don't want to be negative. And that just sounds kind of negative, doesn't it? Okay, so I'm born into this world that's grueling and it's tough to run the race of faith. It's tough to be a Christian. Yes, it is. In fact, it requires self-discipline. It requires determination. It requires perseverance. So it's not like all roses and little candies and sugar canes and all these beautiful things that we like. It is a grueling life. But it's grueling whether you're a Christian or not. Life at best is hard. All right? But he's pointing here to Christians who are having a hard time. Think about this. They'd come out of Judaism where under Judaism they most likely probably had a pretty easy life. Now I'm not saying they had everything easy, but they were probably around a lot of their family in the synagogues. They grew up in those synagogues. Life was pretty, every Jew that lived next to them, they all went there on the Sabbath. They all kept the feasts. And it was, I don't want to say it was a social club, but it was very comfortable for them to be a part of that. But now they become New Testament Christians. And now all of a sudden, Grandpa, who is the old Jew who got us into Judaism, he was one of the patriarchs, maybe, and now he's saying, what are you doing? I'm going to write you out of my will because you did this. Yes, Jill.
Something that helps me wrap my mind around this analogy is if we remember the Olympians started in Greece. I mean, this is their culture of that time frame. They were very much wrapped up in races and competition, so they understood that too. And so that's why they would use that. But it just helps me to reference. They really understood what a race meant.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Taking what those weights off, what that meant to them.
Yeah. And so, but think about this. Think about the persecution they were suffering. Now link that to your life. Sometimes we suffer persecution from family members. Sometimes we suffer persecution at work. Christianity is not a level playing field in the world. It's not a level playing field. If you're a faithful Christian, you don't want to be dishonest. You don't want to step on people. And how do you often climb the corporate ladder? Dishonesty and stepping on people, right? And you can't a lot of times get involved in the things they get involved with. And so a lot of times it feels very isolated. He said, this is a grueling way to live, guys. I'm telling you, there is a race here. There's agony. There's a race, but notice secondly, he brings up this idea of a retarder. There's a retarder here. He says, let us lay aside every weight. So my mind automatically went to kind of like a big diesel engine. So Dan will get this illustration. Many of you will get this illustration. So what do you have on those is a retarder. You either have a brake retarder or an engine retarder. What's it do? It keeps you from going too fast, and you don't really have to use your brakes as much. And so I have one on my bus that as soon as I crest the Crottsville Hill and I start down the other side, I click that baby on. If the roads aren't bad, I click that baby on. I don't have to touch my brakes, go to the bottom, and I can be going 40 miles an hour when I hit the bottom. It's perfect. It's just perfect. I can just drives itself. It's a retarder. It holds you back. All right? But here, that's a positive. But here he's saying there's some things that hold you back in the Christian race. Lay aside every weight and the sin. The word weight there denotes bulk or mass. It's amazing. So in many sports, especially those that require speed and endurance, there's often a weigh-in. Right now, wrestling season is in full swing. And some of these wrestlers are making weight. And every day they weigh in to make sure that they aren't overweight. Runners oftentimes will weigh in. A couple of pounds, a pound here or there, it makes a huge difference. And he said, you're trying to run this grueling race. There's some things that are retarding you. There's some things holding you back. Well, what are they? Well, they're weights and they're sin. There's two things here. It might be emotional strain. It might be physical strain. It might be some sins you're wrapped up in that's not allowing you to run this race the way you ought to run it. And so I want you to think tonight, some of these things that he may be talking about, and he doesn't expound upon them, some of the things he may be talking about, could they be maybe not bad in and of themselves? What are some things? Yeah, What are some things that slow us down or could slow us down in the Christian race that maybe aren't bad in and of themselves? Okay? Yeah. What else? What keeps people from serving the Lord with all their heart? What slows them down in doing that?
Just other things, sports or, clubs or anything.
Yeah. Marissa, sports and clubs. Yeah, I mean, I'm telling you what, if it isn't, now, some people won't like this, and I apologize for this ahead of time, but if it isn't the teaching they're receiving in school that's taking their souls, the sports will do the rest for them. And you say, oh, come on, you can't say that. Oh, I can say that, because if you notice, sports now are Sundays and every single day of the week. All hours of the day. If nothing else, don't even think about the idea of keeping children out of Bible class and children out of worship and families together worshiping, but think about the fact that it keeps families running like a bunch of proverbial chickens with their heads cut off, and they have no time to train their children. They have no time to bring them up in the nurture and the admonition of the Lord, because they're running from one sporting event to another sporting event. Now understand, I'm not against sports, because sports aren't bad in and of themselves. Clubs aren't bad in and of themselves, but when they take us, weigh us down from our commitment to what we've agreed to do, then they are bad. And it's amazing to me, it's almost become accepted in our world today. There are many people who won't have their children on Bible class on Sunday, and when asked about that, oh yeah, the kids had wrestling last week. The kids, and you're not embarrassed about that? You don't realize you get such a small window to bring them up in the nurture and the admonition of the Lord? And once they reach 12th grade, more than likely, they will put those ungodly wrestling, oh, did I bring that up? Those wrestling uniforms to the side, and they'll forget about it, and they'll have some pictures on the wall, and that'll be it. And they'll move on to the next endeavor of life, but yet their soul is with them for eternity. Let us lay aside every weight and the sin which doth so easily beset us. They zap our energy. They weigh us down. They divert our attention. Anything that does that, folks, we need to remove it. Yeah, Dan.
When you talk about that, I can't help but think when Jesus was so busy healing people that one time, and it seemed like he was doing it for days, that he finally just had to remove himself and go up the mountain to pray. And to me, if we're allowing stuff in our lives and we're so busy that we can't even stop and pray, we got a problem.
Yeah. Exactly. Let me ask you about corporate worship. Let me ask you about the building and the affairs that go on in the building. Could some of the things that we engage in as humans in a building weigh us down to where we can't worship God like we ought to be on the Lord's Day? Too busy, yeah. Too busy. I've got things to do, and I got to get this going, and yeah, absolutely. Whatever weighs us down. And really, that's something we need to contemplate. We need to think about that ourselves. What is keeping us from running the race of faith? What's really keeping us? Sammy?
It's funny. If you were watching the Olympics and you saw the guys lining up there to get the race, and you saw a guy get there with full sweats and he's got ankle weights on, you want to think that guy's lost it. He's not thinking clearly. And that's the idea, that you shed that weight. They're good for training purposes, but when you're ready to run that race, they're not going to be there to help you.
No way.
And when I look at the term there, I think he's saying the sin. I think he's talking about something particular, and that's a sin of unbelief. So I think he's really focusing in their minds. You're going back to Judaism, you're falling into unbelief. That's the sin, and you have to get rid of it.
Yeah. And no doubt that was a big, huge, but I before we become too hard on them, let's think about that. How easy it is to hang on to things that we don't want to give up. It's easier that way, right? It's easier that way. We're used to them. We're comfortable with them. They don't allow us to have really any confrontation in the world. It kind of keeps me out of confrontation, right? Whatever it is. And it's interesting because our young people are seeing this. They're seeing this in the world right now. It's easier to be just a quiet Christian, not say a word, not stand up for anything. You won't suffer much persecution that way. But he's not talking about an inactive luxury here. He's talking about an active way to live the Christian life. There's a race. There's a retarder. Then thirdly, notice he gives the... Yeah, Sharon, did you have something? Yeah.
I say, I'd like to hear new Bible songs, I listen to them a lot, and one I came upon recently was really convicting. It says, it's a battlefield, brother, not a recreation room. I don't know if you've ever heard that, so I did it. Wow. It's a really good one.
That's a great one. That's a great one. I love those words. Yeah, it's a battlefield. It's a battlefield. I just read a thing on a hunting a part of thing of a hunting thing that I'm on, and the one guy they're very political on there, so I kind of try to stay out of it. But the one guy said, with given all the things in the world today, would you sign up? Would you sign up for the military? Would you guys sign? They were wanting to get people's opinion whether they'd sign up for the military, and it's interesting because what Sharon just said made me think of that. The way the world is today, would you sign up to be a Christian? Would you sign up to get into this battlefield? I mean, it's tough. It's a grueling race. All right? It's not easy, but he gives us the recipe. He gives us a recipe. Notice this. Let us lay aside every weight and the sin which doth so easily beset us, and let us run patience the race that is set before us. The word patience in the Old King James, or the word endurance in the ESV, it's a compound word. And why that matters is because the Greeks use these compound words a lot. So they'd take one word that meant one thing and another word that meant another thing, and they'd put them together, and it'd be this beautiful word picture. All right? They were big on word pictures. So this word, it's a compound word, and here's the picture. Here's the picture that it presents. So if you would think about, and again, he's keeping this whole theme of a contest. It's kind of like a bodybuilder. Have you ever seen a bodybuilder do squats? Does everybody know what a squat is? So they put the bar kind of across their shoulders like this, and then they squat down. I'm not going to do it. I may not get back up. So, they'll go all the way down to a certain point, and then they'll lift it back up. And so the idea of patience or endurance literally means to stand under that pressure. And that's the word picture. So he's standing under all this weight that's on his shoulders. He's standing firm. He's not being moved. And he said, that's the way you need to run the race of faith. You need to have endurance. So right there again, not only does the race is grueling, but he also paints the picture that, listen, there are going to be burdens on your shoulders that are going to be heavy. All right, this isn't a great evangelistic section, by the way, is it? This isn't for evangelism because, we don't want to tell people what they're getting into. We want to kind of trick them into the waters of baptism, and then we'll hope they're faithful. No, Jesus said, before you do it, you'd better count the cost. And that's what he's saying here. He's saying there's going to be a lot of weight on your shoulders as a Christian. You're running this race, and there are going to be a lot of concerns. There are going to be a lot of things that are going to bother you, that are going to be tough for you. But he said, here's how you need to run. You need to run with steady determination. Keep going. I find it very interesting that success in life, just about in any area, Christianity is no exception, is just continuing. It's just continuing. That's what success in life is about. Well, what do you do when this hits you? You just keep going. A lot of times you have no control over situations. What do you do when you get this disease? What can you do? You keep going. You just keep living the best you can. What do you do when these pressures are on you with the world? You look at the world and it's so sinful and all these things are going on. What do? You just keep shining. You just keep solding. You just keep living. You keep being faithful. And that's what he's saying here. Don't let these things hinder you. You're going to get rid of them. You're cutting them off. And now you're going to stand under that pressure. And I think sometimes we need encouragement, i.e. the book of Hebrews, to tell us to just keep going. That's what he's been telling them. Yeah, Dan.
This idea of endurance here, and I'm glad you brought up the weights. In the Navy, I used to mess around with weights a little bit. And you just don't go in there and flop 750 pounds on the leg press and think you're going to press that out.
Exactly.
You're not going to do it. You have to build up to it. And that's building your endurance, just like a runner, building their endurance. And I have a lot of respect for those Ironmen that run that three-part race with the swimming, running, and bicycling. I'll watch, but
Right.
But they didn't just jump on that and do that. They had to work at it, had to build up the endurance. And it's the same way with Christians. You know, we have new Christians that we need to help along, you know, to help to shield them from some things.
Yep.
You know, like shepherds should be doing, you know, shield them from things so they can be on the right path and start to build that endurance. I imagine these folks that the Hebrew writer is talking about were Christians probably for years. And, you know, so that some of them did, you know, some might be mossbacks that have a little bit of scale on them, you
Yeah.
know, that can withstand that endurance, you know, and endure what's coming along. So we have to remember that. We just can't jump into it. But we need to we need to be mindful and build that endurance. We need to be in God's Word every day. We need to study. We need to especially pray.
Yep.
I mean, you know, we just need to build our endurance.
Great point, man. Great point, Lori.
Perseverance is another, you have to have perseverance along with endurance.
Yeah,
With one without the other, it just doesn't work.
it doesn't.
You have to persevere even though you're going through dark times.
Yeah,
You just have to keep persevering, keep plugging away. That's what I keep doing every day. Tell myself, keep
Yep.
on going.
yeah. That's right, Lori. Perseverance is part of this, and unfortunately, that's a lot of success in Christianity. It's perseverance, because it's not always easy. It's not always easy. And this is something that we've been trying to tell our kids, you know, from the time they were little. But this whole idea of life's not fair. Yeah, you're right. Life's not fair. Life's not fair. It is not ever going to be fair. So don't anticipate it like, well, that's not fair. You're right. It's not fair. There are a lot of things in life that aren't fair. You can sit around and moan about that, or you can persevere through it. Because really, there's only two ways to deal with it. Really. I mean, there's only one right way to deal with it. Yeah, Mike, did you have something?
Way to look at it and kind of puts me in my place. I always think about people in Africa and the Christians over there and the Muslim world. We have no idea what purpose it is, you know?
Yeah.
But God's so easy.
Yeah.
So just get off your mile,
Yeah.
you know, and keep going.
Yeah. Keep going. That's great. Yeah, Dan.
And, another point about the weightlifting and that, I would not have been able to lift the weights that I eventually got to, like on my deadlifts and stuff like that, the leg press, if I didn't have guys that are encouraging me, helping me, giving me pointers and stuff like that. So I didn't do it alone. And Christians, we should be trying to do it alone. We should be helping each other in this race. You know?
Exactly.
And maybe I'm thinking about a football analogy here now. Maybe we have to be a blocker, you know, to keep them from getting hit by something that they may not be ready for yet.
Yeah. It's a great point. And funny with this illustration, and then we'll move on. I don't want to bemoan the illustration, but the other day, you know, my youngest son was doing some work activity to build some farm muscles. We believe in farm muscles, not so much weight muscles. So, and he said, "Oh man, Dad, my arms, they're burning. I can't even hardly lift them." And I said, "Just go a little bit more, because you're building muscle." He knew that. I didn't have to tell him. I just need to encourage him. But when you build endurance, it tears, it rips, it hurts. May I say it like this? Because he used the illustration, not me. If it doesn't hurt, you're probably not doing very much. You're probably not really growing. So sometimes when it hurts, the harder it hurts, sometimes, don't let any of you suffer as a murderer, a thief, or a busybody in other men's matters. But if any man suffers as a Christian, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about suffering for the cause of Christ. It builds us. It gives us that endurance. Excellent point. All right, so then he moves to the example. All right, to the example, verses 2 and 3. Then he says, let's run with patience the race is set before us, verse 1. Then he says, here's how you do it. Looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is set down at the right hand of the throne of God. For consider him that endured such contradiction of sinners against himself, lest ye be wearied and faint in your minds. In physical sports, they tell me that where you look determines your level of success. For example, if a person's going to run, Sammy used that illustration a minute ago. He comes up to the line, there's all these people lined up there. If the first thing he does is look way down there at the finish line, if he can even see it, and say, "You see how far that is? Do you see how hot it is? We don't get any water till we get to that first, right there, that first break. Man, did you see how uneven that track? That track's not perfect. What? I'm telling you right now, I quit, right? Because he's looking in the wrong place. But if he looks past the finish line, right on the other side of the finish line, there's going to be a prize waiting for him. And it's interesting that the writer would do this. I want you to think about criticism. What if an athlete's running? This is just so real. Athlete's running the race. He's wanting to get to the finish line, but there's somebody along the sideline. And he's saying, is that all the faster you can go? You kidding me? How'd you even get in the contest? What happens if he stops and looks at that guy? He lost. He's taken his focus somewhere else. Let me ask you a question. In running the race of faith, let's just take off our suit coats for a minute. Let's just take off our faith coats, okay? And let's be real. In running the race of faith, is there criticism? There are people standing on the sidelines. You know, I just had a great conversation with one of my preaching brothers today. He's got a son who is also a gospel preacher, and he's just coming through a real dark valley. And I said to him, I said, you know what you expect is criticism and hurt from the world. You expect that, right? I do. But man, when my brethren do it, that hurts. Now I said, we're going to take off our coats for a minute, and we're going to be real. Do Christians ever criticize one another unduly? Are we sometimes not encouraging like the cloud of witnesses? Are we sometimes there to try to detract from people? We are, aren't we? You know what, brethren? We need to think about this. I'm a little bit more passionate about it because I see a young preacher being hurt. We need to be a little bit more considerate of each other and thinking about where each other are. Instead of criticizing and looking at the negatives that we all have, look at the positives. Because you know what? If you look at the negatives, it will be distracting. But if you look at the positives, you'll see a lot of good in the church, a lot of good among brethren. He says, you don't look at criticism. You keep your focus on Jesus. What about an athlete who looks at how much more he must endure to win? He's halfway down the track and he's like, I still got 3 miles to go. Man, he's discouraged, isn't he? He's quitting. What about an athlete? Oh boy, what about an athlete who begins the race and he says, you know what? Last week I entered that race and I lost. I messed up. I tripped. I didn't win. How about that athlete? How good is he going to do in this race? You know what we do as Christians sometimes, folks? We're starting to run the race. We mess up because we trip and fall. And sometimes we don't run as fast as we ought to, and sometimes we don't run as good as we should. And you know what we do? We let that guilt and that past mistake to haunt us all the way to the finish line. You can't run effectively. You know, and we need to learn, like God, to forgive ourselves. We need to learn to forgive ourselves and put our past behind us. I'm not talking about the person that's persisting in sin. I'm talking about the person who's walking in the light. He's running the race of faith. And yes, he makes mistakes. No, he is not perfect. He will mess up. He'll mess up again down the road, I guarantee you. But this guy's not looking at his failures. He's looking at the prize. He's looking at Jesus Christ. Now, in contrast to all those, think about the athlete who looks to his hero who finished the event in unmatchable time and perfection. You know, every athlete, I guess, has his mentor or his hero, right? You know, you could think of some of them through the years. Now, when you get to know some of them, they were scoundrels, but, you know, some of them were still, they're your hero, you know. I remember, some of you guys will probably relate to who was it? It was it Joe Frazier and Muhammad Ali? Some of those guys that were, you know, and Mike Tyson comes along, and he was a hero for a little bit till he couldn't keep his teeth off of people, and then and he kind of lost that, right? But these guys were, you look to heroes. You want to do something, you have a mentor, you look to hero. But any hero we have in this world. So sometimes Christians fail here because they have a hero that sits in a pew. Now, you can admire somebody. Didn't he say that we can look to Abraham and Moses? Didn't he say that? Yeah, what he said was, you glance to them, but you gaze at Jesus Christ. So you kind of like, you're running and you look up there, man, Moses, he was all right. Man, Abraham, he gave me some encouragement. But you know what? Jesus. Because I'm never disappointed with Jesus. Never. Never disappointed. And you know when we become disappointed with our faith? A lot of times is when we take our focus off Jesus. You know what I think is so funny about this lesson? Today, this morning, started out real bad for me. And you know why it started out bad for me? Anybody want to take a guess? I took my eyes off Jesus. I did. I didn't mean to. I wish I wouldn't have. But you know what's interesting? I didn't even realize I did it. I didn't realize I took my eyes off of him. Thankfully, my wife saw it. And she said, "What's your focus? Where are you focused?" Oh, yeah. Yeah, okay. All right, I got you. I got to come back and focus on Jesus. And so as I focused on him and his word and talking to him, all of a sudden the race was a little bit more doable. The race was easier run this afternoon than it was this morning. Why? Because I had my focus, I had my gaze. The problem is my eyes still sometimes take it off of Jesus. Yeah, Patty.
I'm sitting here, this is kind of interesting, not that I'm into horses or anything, but when you're riding, and I'm not a trained rider, but I've seen this and I've read this so many places, when you're riding like the 100 jumpers that are doing a course and they're going over the jumps, you are to keep your eye where you want to go all the time. And that's where the horse will go. If the jump is here and you look that way, the percentage is really high that either the horse is going to refuse or it's going to miss the jump or whatever.
Wow.
And I think the reason why is just because it throws, just ever so slightly throws the balance off.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But you have to always look where you want to go.
That's amazing, isn't it? What a pertinent illustration. But can't you see that in your life? Can't you see that every day? That when you run the race of faith, that when it becomes real difficult, it's because you have lost focus. Now, I'm not saying that it's sometimes not legitimate to lose focus. You know, you've got a disease, it's easy to take your eyes off Jesus, isn't it? You got a frustrating situation, you got a family problem, you got a financial problem. It's sometimes easy to take our eyes off Jesus. But that's what he's saying here. He's saying it's tough for you, it's agonizing for you, but part of the reason is because you're not looking in the right direction. You don't have the goal in mind. Jesus is the example. He is the perfect example. Jesus wrote the book on Christianity, right? He wrote the book. If you want to be an exemplary Christian, you look to Jesus. Don't say, well, what would brother so-and-so do? Or what would sister so-and-so do? And we've experienced this in our family. I don't mind a bit being transparent with you. We have tried to train our children. This is right, this is wrong, here we are. But yet they would meet a Christian somewhere that did the very opposite of what we were saying. And then they, inevitably kids are smart. They would come home and say, well, they're a Christian and they do that. They're a Christian and they watch those kind of movies. I'll say, let me ask you a question. Don't ask yourself if that Christian watches that movie or if that Christian watches this movie. Ask Jesus, would you watch the movie? And that was just one illustration. Would you listen to the song? Would you go to that place? Would you do it? Because you see, don't look at me. I can mess up. I just told you I sometimes run the race and trip. And so does every Christian. Every Christian falls. I've heard people, look, some of these stalwart preachers, I love old preachers. I love them. They're awesome. They laid the foundation. They lit the fire. Man, they stoked it. I mean, I'm warming myself by coals that they've done. But let me tell you something. The older preachers aren't my illustration for how to live my life. They'll say, well, and I like Guy N. Woods, so don't get mad at me, Sammy, okay? I love him. But, well, Guy N. Woods believed this. I don't care what Guy N. Woods believed. I know what Jesus believes. That's what I want to do. That's who I want to be. I want to be like him. I want to be like him in my Christianity, in my preaching, in my daily life, in my talk, in my thoughts. And I always know, but I'm forgetting that stuff. I'm putting that behind me and I'm keeping running, looking at Jesus. I can't imagine how this author, or how these Christians rather, must have been taking this. Now, understand, the author's not minimizing their problems, the things that they were going under. He's just giving them some encouragement, some places to focus. You take your eyes off Jesus, folks, listen to me. You'll never cross the finish line. You won't do it. You'll be like Hymenaeus and Alexander. You'll be like others in the Bible. You'll be like Judas. You will have fallen short of the prize. Jesus is the focus, and that's what he's saying here. Number next, he gives us the encouragement. Look at verse 4. You have not resisted unto blood, striving against sin. Now here's something that's interesting. He says about Jesus, verse 3, consider him that endured such contradiction against sinners against himself, of sinners against himself, lest you be wearied and faint in your minds. So now they get this picture of Jesus. Consider him. What do we consider about Jesus? Well, there's unfair things thrown at him constantly. Did you, in your 30 days, you had an extra day today, was free, right? You had a free day. If you did your 30 days, you had an extra day, you didn't have to read. I started back through. I got Matthew 1 through 9 today, so I'm starting on the program again. That is, if you're caught up. Some aren't caught up, just keep going. Did Jesus have any unfair insults or criticism thrown at him? You're all chuckling. Why are you chuckling? Because you're like, my human mind probably couldn't list them all, could they? Everywhere he turned, he's getting an unfair criticism. One of the funniest parts of the story of Christ is one moment he's riding into Jerusalem, the triumphal entry, and they're throwing palm leaves before him, palm branches before him. They're saying, Hosanna, Hosanna. And literally in the next breath, they're saying, crucify him, crucify him. Now, we often say, look at the fickleness of people. That's true, but I want you to notice, you talk about being on the mountain to the valley. Now he's being hung on a cross. Look at the blood he shed. That blood, that precious blood, look at it. It spewed out of every part of his body. His back, his head, his side, his hands, his feet. Ridiculed, laughed at. You cast out demons by the power of Beelzebub. And you talk about slapping him in the face. You're a glutton. You're a wine bibber. You're not, just all the hurling insults at him. Come down from the cross if you're the Son of God. And then he says, hey guys, if you're considering him, look at yourselves, look at your arms, look at your hands, look at your feet. You're not spewing out blood yet. You haven't resisted to the blood, to the severest type of persecution. Now again, he's not minimizing their problems, but he's encouraging them. Just think about this for a minute. You have not given in. You're still running and you're not dead yet. Keep running. Sometimes, and that's kind of what Mike did a minute ago. Did you hear Mike? He said sometimes he just needs to correct himself or something along those lines. He looks at people where the Taliban's big and all that stuff, and they're going through all these things. We could say the same about us. You know what? I'm having trouble running the race of faith tonight. You could say to me, yeah, but you're not bleeding. You've not resisted the blood. Kind of like Mike said, we have it pretty good, really. Oh, sometimes people, not here. You guys are so encouraging, and I don't want to leave that impression. But sometimes, I preach a sermon and somebody doesn't like the sermon. They get mad at the Word of God. All right. So what? They didn't steal your lunch, right? They didn't knife you in the foyer. They didn't shoot you in your vehicle. They didn't kill one of your kids. Come on, you haven't resisted the bloodshed yet. Keep going. And that's what he's saying. That's what he's encouraging them to do. You know what? Sometimes we need to stop and look at this. Yes, I'm having a difficult situation. Yes, I'm in a turmoil. This is an agony. It's an agonizing race. But you know what? As hard as it is sometimes, I still have it really good. I'm still blessed beyond measure. And that's kind of what he's telling these people. Just consider it, man. Keep going. Keep living the faith. Any questions or comments on that? Isn't that so rich? Yeah, Sammy.
I'll give you the formula for spiritual success.
All right.
Where I got this. It says, if you want to be distressed, look within. If you want to be defeated, look back. If you want to be distracted, look around. If you want to be dismayed, look ahead. If you want to be delivered, look up.
Amen. I'll bet you Sammy would share that with you if you asked him afterwards. That ought to be written in the front of someone's Bible. Right? Isn't that true? That's exactly what he's saying here. Where's your focus? I just want to emphasize again, folks, if we focus on each other too much, we'll be discouraged. Okay? You young people, remember this. You remember this. You want to live the Christian life, you want to be faithful to God, then you look to Jesus. He'll never disappoint you. I just wrote my kids a text today. We were doing this family reading together, the 30 days thing. I sent them a text every morning, and part of my text was this. Look to Jesus. I told them, I said, make sure you don't even look to me. And then I said, especially me. Why? Because if you're basing your Christianity on what Dad does, guess what? You're looking to the wrong standard. Dad's not the standard. Jesus is the standard. Keep our focus on Christ. It makes it a lot easier to run the race. I'll tell you, folks, I'm going to be honest with you. When I have trouble with my Christianity, it's when I take my focus off Christ. There's a lot of distractions. Want to be distracted? Look, what was that one? Look around, dismayed, look ahead. Yeah. Oh, dismayed, Sammy. I'm good with that one. Oh, well, I've got all this to do, and oh man, how am I going to get all that accomplished for the Lord? How am I going to do that? No, just take the next battle, and the next thing you know, you've run the race of faith. Yeah, James.
Remember this from a movie, a book I read. Corey Tenboom, she lost all her family in Nazi concentration camps. She survived herself. It was a great struggle. She had a lot of hate in her heart towards the Nazis and so forth. But what she said was similar to what Sam was saying. You look at the world, you'll be distressed. If you look within, you'll be depressed. If you look at God, you'll be at rest.
Oh, I like that. That's rich. That's rich. I'll tell you what. Sometimes these cliche sayings, like we might call that a cliche. Let me tell you something. There's so much truth in that. And isn't that exactly? It's almost like those two authors, Author Unknown and Corey Ten Boom. I love Author Unknown. They get this right from the Word of God. That's where it comes from. Did you guys have a question? Oh, I'm so sorry. Sometimes I can't. What? Well, I'm going to guess. I could be wrong here. James, correct me. I'm going to guess that Sammy and James would give both of those to you if you want them afterwards. All right? Because that one ought to be on the front page of your Bible too, on the front cover of your Bible too. Because, man, I love that stuff. Why? Because it's so true. This is living the Christian life, folks. It is so, so true. That's why this book is so rich. All right? Anything else? Yeah, Dan.
Christ went through all these things for us. I mean, again, a football analogy, he was that blocking line or that blocking fullback. He went through everything. He didn't allow anything to stop him. And that cleared a path for us. Now, does that mean we're going to have it easy following him? Well, if you ever watch football, no. But we keep our eye on Christ. He's at the finish line. I keep thinking about races and stuff like that, and the metaphors here with race. Dan Clemens is never going to be the first one to cross that finish line. But you know how I win? I cross that finish line.
Right.
That's how I win. And I can't help but thinking on these marathons. I used to watch the Boston and New York marathons religiously every year because it just amazed me. These people could run that, 26 miles. But really what amazed me was like at the end, the race had already been won first, second, third, whatever the places they were in. But back in the pack, someone hit the wall within sight of the finish line and just fell down. And what happened? Another racer came up, or two, and picked them up and took them with them across the finish line.
Yeah.
And that's exactly how we need to be as Christians. If we see a brother or sister stumble and fall, we need to pick them up and help them get across that finish line.
Yeah. And I'm so glad God set up the church the way He did. I'll tell you what, we need help crossing the finish line. Yeah, James.
With regard to Jesus, in verse 2, how did He endure the cross? Says for the joy that was set before Him. That's what His focus was. And you look at His ministry from going to the Father. Okay? It says here He despised the shame. And I guess the picture I get is He didn't dwell on it. He didn't, that did not become His focus. And again, you look at His ministry and the statements He made in it. He didn't woe is me, I gotta go. And I'm not talking about Gethsemane. Gethsemane was I'm not minimizing Gethsemane. But he didn't spend 3 years saying, woe is me, and being a crybaby.
Yep.
I mean, just
Yep.
laying it out there.
Yep.
His focus was, I've got my mission to do for the Lord and enjoy this thing before me. He talks here in verse 3 about lest you become weary and discouraged in your soul. So much of our spiritual battles take place between our two ears.
Yeah.
And we are way too good at making ourselves weary and discouraged by focusing on the wrong thing. This life is hard for everybody. It's really hard for a non-Christian, in my opinion.
Right.
To go through life with no hope, no faith. You've got alcohol, drug problems all around you. I mean, I don't know how they make it through.
Yeah.
As Christians, we have, Jesus said, an abundant life. And so I just think there's so much about focus. And that is if there's good things about athletics, the ability to focus.
Yep.
Defensive back, last thing I'll say. They say a defensive back's on the island. He's got to cover that receiver. He's going to get beat at times. You got to live one play at a time. You cannot live saying, "Oh, I got beat the last play." You can't play defensive back if you do that. It's impossible. You have to live one time. Let that play as its own, and that's the only way you can be successful.
Yeah.
And there's a lot to be said about the Christian life, about living that way.
And that's a great point. Folks, let's understand this. And I'll illustrate this a little bit more on Sunday because we're going to talk about facing life's adversity, life's challenges. James said a minute ago, and I believe it's true, life is difficult no matter if you're an atheist or an agnostic or a Christian. It's difficult. It's not going to get easier for you. Cancer's not going to skip you because you become an atheist. Cancer's not going to skip you because you become a Christian. All right? So the point is this. I would rather live my life with the right focus and perspective because, man, what a miserable way to live if I lose my perspective. Everything's dark. Everything's gloomy. I can't live each day like that. Look to Jesus. I'm going to guarantee you what, if we can keep our eyes focused on Him, we will not be discouraged as far as quitting. We will not be wearied in our minds. We'll continue to run the race of faith. Next week, we're going to come back in this next section. Oh boy, you talk about greatness. Because you can almost hear them saying, and I'm not going to get into this section right now, but you can almost hear them saying, well, yeah, but it seems like now that I've become a Christian, it's just like it's gotten worse to me. It's gotten worse on me. And God oftentimes gets the blame for our problems, doesn't He? Well, I read an interesting perspective today that was phenomenal. I don't want to share very much of it. I'm going to share one little part with you in closing. There was a writer said this, and I'd never thought about it this way. He said, we have a tsunami, a hurricane, an earthquake, and everybody says, where's God? Where's God? Why'd God let this happen? 5,000 people die. He said, let's walk back in time to Genesis chapter 6. When Noah was a preacher of righteousness, pleading with people to follow God, and they wouldn't listen. And then He brought a flood upon the world. The entire world was flooded. He said, the Bible says, and he's right on with this, he said, the fountains of the deep were opened. He said, what did that do to the earth's crust? What did that do to the environment underneath the soil? He said, why do we have hurricanes? Why do we have problems and big fault lines and earthquakes and all these things? He said, it's not God's fault. It's man's fault. And I thought, wow, I had never thought of it that way. Now I'm talking, that's rich. That is rich. He links it back to sin. Now, is he 100% right all the time? Maybe not. Maybe not. But that sure is an interesting way to look at it, isn't it? Why'd that hurricane happen? God, why'd you let that happen? No, I didn't. I tried to plead with them not to sin. I tried to plead with Adam and Eve to stay right, and they wouldn't do it. I tried to plead in Noah's day. I sent them a preacher of righteousness, and they wouldn't listen. Look at the earth now. It's a curse. Mike.
We have no reason to complain. If we've got seashells and mountains, they should realize every part of it is true.
Yeah.
And we better wake up.
Yeah. I'll tell you something.
Get on there.
Exactly. I mean, this guy brought up cancer and everything else. It was a really interesting read. He brought up cancer. He said about the way we've abused our world, all the carcinogens we've pumped into it, all the additives in our food. I was like, man, I'm telling you what, you just opened a can of worms, get my mind running. I'm thinking, you know what? Maybe it isn't God's fault that I have cancer. You know, maybe it's because I've been eating too much McDonald's or something. And I'm not saying everybody gets cancer has too much McDonald's. I'm not saying that. Please, do not take that. I'm saying sometimes the problems I bring on myself are the problems I bring on myself and not God, right? It's like a guy that drinks all his life, and then why is my liver failing? Folks, it stands to reason, right? Yeah, Dan, and then we'll close.
Everything Christ went through leading up to the cross, and I know the cross was bad, but I think for Christ, there was something beyond the cross that was even worse. When he was hanging on the cross, and God turned his back on him, because Christ at that moment took on sin, and God removed himself from him. And Jesus was never without God from eternity. But at that point, God had to turn his back on him. And I think everything he went through prepared him for that moment.
Yep.
And he still cried out, you know, my God, why have you forsaken me? And a lot of people don't grasp it. I don't fully grasp it. But I know he went through it so I could have that chance of eternity with him in heaven.
Yeah. I'll tell you what, when he was hanging on that cross, the joy that was set before him. Glorify thou me with the glory that I had with thee before the world was. That's what he had his focus on. James said a minute ago. That's what he had his focus on, folks. What do I have my focus on tonight? I'm going to heaven. All right? Y'all get on the bandwagon if you want to. I hope you do, but I'm going to heaven. All right? Let's go to heaven together. All right, great study. This book has been so encouraging to me. It is just so rich. I'm thankful for those who had suggested, hey, let's study Hebrews. I think it was a great idea, all right? So I'm giving it back to you. Thank you, because it has richly blessed my life, this study so far. All right, you know what? I don't have a lot of announcements.